Okay, we are back in Report from Iron Mountain, and we will begin Section 6, Substitutes for the Function of War. By now it should be clear that the most detailed and comprehensive master plan for a transition to world peace will remain academic if it fails to deal forthrightly with the problem of the critical non-military functions of war. The social needs they serve are essential. If the war system no longer exists, to meet them, substitute institutions will have to be established for the purpose. These surrogates must be realistic, which is to say of a scope and nature that can be conceived and implemented on the context of present-day social capabilities. This is not the truism it may appear to be. The requirements of radical social change often reveal the distinction between a most conservative projection and a wildly utopian scheme to be fine indeed. In this section we will consider some possible substitutes for these functions. Only in rare instances have they been put forth for the purposes which concern us here, but we see no reason to limit ourselves to proposals that address themselves explicitly to the problem as we have outlined it. We will disregard the ostensible or military functions of war. It is a premise of this study that the transition to peace implies absolutely that they will no longer exist in any relevant sense. We will also disregard the non-critical functions exemplified at the end of the preceding section. Economic surrogates for war must meet two principal criteria. They must be wasteful, in the common sense of the word, and they must operate outside the normal supply-demand system. A corollary that should be obvious is that the magnitude of the waste must be sufficient to meet the needs of a particular society. An economy as advanced and complex as our own requires the planned average annual destruction of not less than 10% of gross national product if it is effectively to fulfill its stabilizing function. When the mass of a balance wheel is inadequate to the power it is intended to control, its effect can be self-defeating, as with a runaway locomotive. The analogy, though crude, is especially apt for the American economy, as our record of cyclical depressions shows, as have taken place during depressions of grossly inadequate military spending. Let me reread that sentence, I did that wrong. All have taken place during periods of grossly inadequate military spending. Those few economic conversion programs which by implication acknowledge the non-military economic function of war, at least to some extent, tend to assume that so-called social welfare expenditures will fill the vacuum created by the disappearance of military spending. When one considers the backlog of unfinished business proposed but still unexecuted in this field, the assumption seems plausible. Let us examine briefly the following list, which is more or less typical of general social welfare programs. Health. Drastic expansion of medical research, education, and training facilities, hospital and clinic construction, the general objective of complete government guaranteed health care for all at a level consistent with current developments in medical technology. Education. The equivalent of the foregoing in teacher training, schools and libraries, the drastic upgrading of standards, with the general objective of making available for all an attainable educational goal equivalent to what is now considered a professional degree. Housing. Clean, comfortable, safe, and spacious living space for all at the level now enjoyed by about 15% of the population in this country, less in most others. Transportation. The establishment of a system of mass public transportation, making it possible for all to travel to and from areas of work and recreation quickly, comfortably, and conveniently, and to travel privately for pleasure rather than necessity. Physical environment. The development and protection of water supplies, forests, parks, and other natural resources, the elimination of chemical and bacterial contaminants from air, water, and soil. poverty. The genuine elimination of poverty, defined by a standard consistent with current economic productivity by means of a guaranteed annual income or whatever system of distribution, will best assure its achievement. This is only a sampler of the most obvious domestic social welfare items, and we have listed it in a deliberately broad, perhaps extravagant manner. In the past, such a vague and ambitious-sounding program would have been dismissed out of hand without serious consideration. It would clearly have been prima facie far too costly, quite apart from its political implications. Our objection to it, on the other hand, could hardly be more contradictory. As an economic substitute for war, it is inadequate because it would be far too cheap. If this seems paradoxical, it must be remembered that up to now, all proposed social welfare expenditures have to be measured within the war economy, not as a replacement for it. The old slogan about a battleship or an ICBM costing as much as X hospitals or Y schools or Z homes takes on a very different meaning if there are to be no more battleships or ICBMs. Since the list is general, we have elected to forestall the tangential controversy that surrounds arbitrary cost projections by offering no individual cost estimates. By the maximum program that could be physically affected along the lines indicated could approach the established level of military spending only for a limited time. In our opinion, subject to a detailed cost and feasibility analysis less than 10 years in this short period. At this rate, the major goals of the program would have been achieved, its capital investment phase would have been completed, and it would have established a permanent, comparatively modest level of annual operating cost within the framework of the general economy. And we will continue with section 6 substitutes for the functions of war in the next video.